quaint town of Bloomfield. The air was filled with the crisp, rejuvenating scent of spring. The streets, lined with neatly trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds, were a testament to the community's dedication to beauty and order. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where the rhythm of life was predictable, and where the whispering breezes carried nothing but the sweet promises of normalcy. I had lived here all my life, finding comfort in the familiar cadence of the town's daily affairs. My home, a modest two-story house with a white picket fence, stood as a monument to routine and tranquility. Every morning, I would sit on my porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the world wake up. The milkman made his rounds. The newspaper hit the driveway with a satisfying thud, and the school bus groaned as it picked up the neighborhood children. It was a ritual, this observation of life unfolding with such predictable precision that gave me solace. Yet, beneath the surface of this picturesque setting lay the shadows of secrets that the town's pretty facade could not entirely hide. Spring was the season of rebirth and renewal, but it was also the time when the rain came. Spring rains in Bloomfield were not unusual. They were necessary for the flowers to bloom and the grass to remain lush and green. However, one morning as I sat with my coffee, I noticed an unsettling heaviness in the air. The sky was a dull slate gray, and a strange metallic tang lingered just at the edge of perception. The birds, usually so lively at this hour, were conspicuously silent. It was mid-morning when the rain began to fall. At first, it was nothing more than a light drizzle, almost refreshing after the weeks of dry weather. But then, as I stood watching from my window, I noticed the color. It wasn't clear, life-giving water that kissed the ground. Instead, it was tinted a peculiar shade of red, as though the sky itself was weeping blood. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again, hoping the tint was merely a trick of the light, but it remained unwavering. The rain fell steadily, pooling into crimson puddles on the sidewalks, running in thin, unsettling rivulets down the street. My first thought was that some kind of pollutant had been carried by the storm clouds, tainting the rain with its color. Yet, as I continued to watch, a shiver ran down my spine, and an inscrutable dread settled in my chest. The sight was almost mesmerizing in its surrealism, the rain painting the town in hues of red, as if warning of something ominous lurking just out of sight. I wasn't alone in my unease. Through the window, I could see neighbors emerging from their homes, umbrellas in hand, faces etched with confusion and apprehension. People pointed, gestured, and spoke in hushed tones, their voices carried away by the wind. Children who had initially rushed outside to play in the rain were swiftly called back indoors, their parents' faces a mask of concern. The entire town was enveloped in a curious silence, broken only by the steady patter of the crimson rain as the day wore on. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Instead, it intensified, pounding against rooftops and running in torrents along the gutters. It was then that I began to notice something even stranger. With each passing hour, an undeniable sense of guilt began to creep into my thoughts, a whisper that grew louder, more insistent, as the rain persisted. It felt as though the rain was more than just an anomaly of nature. It was a presence, a voice that seeped into the cracks of my conscience, dredging up memories and regrets I had long buried. By nightfall, the town was enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere, the rain painting the world in shades of darkness and red. The street lights cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the falling rain, and the incessant drumming against my windows was a constant reminder of the storm outside. I tried to distract myself, to read, to watch a film, but the rain and the overwhelming sense of remorse it brought with it were inescapable. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a tumultuous sea of thoughts and emotions. Memories I had hoped to forget surfaced with startling clarity. Times when I had been unkind, moments I had hurt those around me, opportunities for forgiveness I had neglected. Each recollection was like a cut, sharp and stinging, reopening old wounds I had convinced myself were healed. The rain, it seemed, was acting as a mirror, reflecting my deepest failings back at me with merciless clarity. Days passed, each blending into the next under the unrelenting crimson deluge. The town had shut down. Schools and businesses closed as the populace huddled indoors, grappling with their own personal hauntings. The news offered no explanation, only speculation and incredulity. Scientists were baffled, and the media had dubbed it simply the blood rain phenomenon. Yet deep down I sensed the rain was more than a mere weather anomaly. It was a harbinger, a catalyst that exposed the hidden darkness within us all. The escalation came not just in the relentless fall of rain, but in the way it seemed to unleash a collective anxiety, a shared madness that gripped Bloomfield. People began to act out, driven by fear and guilt. Fights broke out over trivial matters, friendships were strained, and long-buried grudges resurfaced with a vengeance. It was as if the rain had washed away the veneer of civility, revealing the raw, messy underbelly of human nature. In the midst of this chaos, I was not immune. My thoughts, usually so orderly and controlled, spiraled into a maelstrom of self-recrimination and doubt. I found myself questioning everything I had ever done, every decision I had made. I was haunted by the specter of my past, each misstep amplified by the rain's relentless presence. Sleep became elusive, and when it came, it was filled with vivid, unsettling dreams that left me more exhausted than before. The climax came one night when the storm reached its zenith. The wind howled through the streets like a wounded animal, and the rain fell with such ferocity that it seemed to be pounding the very earth into submission. I was driven to the brink, the oppressive weight of guilt finally too much to bear. In a moment of desperation, I flung open the front door. Stepping out into the deluge, the red rain washing over me like a baptism of shame, I stood there, drenched in trembling, shouting into the storm, confessing my sins to the uncaring sky. I screamed out my regrets, my fears, my longing for redemption. The rain was deafening, a cacophony that drowned out my voice, yet in its unwavering presence, I found a strange sense of release. In that moment of vulnerability under the blood rain, I realized that the only way to quiet the tempest within was to confront it. When the storm finally abated, it did so with an abruptness that was almost disorienting. The skies cleared and the sun rose on a town washed clean, but irrevocably changed. The streets were stained with the remnants of the rain, a lingering reminder of all that had transpired. Bloomfield, once a model of order and perfection, now stood as a testament to the chaos that lay beneath its surface. The lingering fear remained, a shadow that clung to the edges of my consciousness. But the rain had stopped, its effects had seeped deep into the fabric of our lives. The town was quieter now, its people more subdued, as if the storm had left us all a little more fragile, a little more aware of our own shortcomings. The air was still tinged with that strange metallic scent, a reminder of the blood rain and the secrets it had uncovered. As I sat on my porch once more, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The rain had forced us to confront the parts of ourselves we wished to ignore, to face the guilt and remorse we had buried. It had been a trial by storm, a cleansing that, though painful, had also paved the way for change. Bloomfield would never be the same, and neither would I. But in that transformation there was hope. Hope that, like the flowers blooming anew after the rain, we too could find redemption, could learn to forgive ourselves and each other. The storm had passed, the rain had ceased, but its lessons would linger, etched into our hearts like the indelible marks of a life lived fully, with all its flaws and beauty exposed to the light. It was the kind of rain that seemed to hang in the air, suspended rather than simply falling from the sky. That day, the drizzle coated the landscape like steam rising from a cup of overly steeped tea, and I found myself standing by the old fence on the edge of our farm. The field stretched before me, encased by a rusted mesh fence that had been there long before my family arrived. The land beyond it was always damp, even during the driest spells, with a peculiar dark earth that never quite seemed to dry. My father often spoke of the field with a mixture of disdain and resignation. "That land's no good for planting," he'd say, shaking his head whenever the conversation turned to expansion or improvement. "Leave it be. It's cursed, that plot," he'd add with a nervous chuckle that never reached his eyes. It was a story I grew up hearing, a tale of a field that swallowed seeds and spat out nothing but thistles and unnaturally twisted roots. Life on the farm was ordinary, predictable even. We rose with the sun, worked the land that had been passed down through generations, and rested when the shadows grew long. Yet, with each passing day, I felt an inexplicable pull toward the fenced-off field, a curiosity that grew stronger, especially when the rain came. It was as if the very air around the field thrummed with an energy I couldn't articulate, a whisper of something just beyond the veil of the known. I remember the first time I truly felt its presence. The rain was light but insistent, a constant patter against the roof and windows as I sat inside, staring out at the gloom. Something about the way the rain fell on that field made it shimmer, and I found myself drawn to it, an urge that was as irrational as it was irresistible. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the downpour, my feet leading me to the boundary that separated the ordinary world from whatever lay beyond. The first disturbance came when I saw something moving in the field. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer perhaps, or a stray dog, but as I squinted through the rain, I saw that the movement was not that of a creature on four legs, but rather an undulation of the ground itself. The soil seemed to ripple, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a sudden breeze. My heart raced, and I took a step back, the muddy earth sucking at my boots with a reluctance that felt almost sentient. I told no one about the sight, unsure if it was a trick of the rain or my imagination. Instead, I watched the field from a distance on the following days, waiting for another sign, some proof that I hadn't simply conjured the vision out of boredom or a craving for something beyond routine. The rain persisted day after day, and with it, the field seemed to pulse with an energy that grew more pronounced, more insistent. The escalation began subtly. It was in the way the animals grew restless, their eyes wide with unease, as if sensing something in the air that I could not. The dogs whimpered and scratched at the door, uninterested in their usual romps through the grass, while the cattle huddled together, their lowing continuous and mournful. There was a heaviness to the air, a tingling tension that made my skin prickle as if charged with static. I started dreaming of the field at night. Vivid dreams in which the rain was a curtain of silver threads, and something moved beneath it, beckoning. I would wake with a start, my sheets damp with sweat, the sound of rain echoing in my ears as if pleading with me to return. Sleep became a place of dread, Yet I felt compelled each evening to peer out the window, my eyes drawn inexorably to the glistening expanse of the haunted plot. One evening, as the storm reached a new ferocity, I ventured out again, driven by a need I could not name. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, and the rain drummed a relentless rhythm on my body. As I reached the fence, a flash of lightning illuminated the field, revealing what I had only sensed before. Figures, shadowy, indistinct, moved across the ground, their forms shifting and blending with the mist and rain. My breath caught in my throat, and despite the chill, I felt a warmth spreading through me, an acknowledgement of their presence. The climax of my encounters came when I dared to step beyond the boundary. Compelled by a force that felt both gentle and commanding, I climbed over the fence, the metal cold and slick beneath my hands. The moment my feet touched the saturated soil, the rain intensified, a torrent that seemed to drum in time with the quickening of my heart. I stood there, transfixed as the figures drew closer, their edges shimmering with an ethereal light that cut through the gloom. They circled me, their faces obscured yet somehow familiar, as if drawn from the depths of my own subconscious. There was no malice in their movements, only a deep, resonant sadness that tugged at my heart. I understood then that they were bound to the land, their spirits trapped in an endless cycle, yearning for release. It was a story untold, a history buried beneath layers of earth and rain, and I was both audience and participant. Time seemed to slip away as I stood there, the rain a constant hymn around us. I felt a connection to the field, to the figures, as if the barrier between our worlds had thinned, allowing a moment of understanding to pass between us. They needed me, or perhaps someone like me, to acknowledge their presence, to remember their story, so they might finally find peace. Eventually, the storm began to abate, the rain easing into a gentle drizzle. The figures faded into the mist, leaving me alone in the field. I returned to the farm, my clothes soaked, my mind filled with a strange serenity. The rain continued to fall, a soft cadence that felt both familiar and comforting, as if the land itself was thankful for the recognition I had given it. In the days that followed, the rain became less frequent, and the field began to dry for the first time in my memory. The animals returned to their usual routines, their previous agitation forgotten, yet the sense of the field's presence lingered in my mind, a gentle reminder of the encounter I had shared. I no longer felt drawn to it with the same intensity, yet the connection remained, a quiet understanding that we were somehow linked. As time passed, I found myself reflecting on the events. The line between reality and imagination blurred, but meaningful. The farm continued its cycle, seasons turning as they always had, but I carried the whisper of the rain and the figures in my heart. Even now, when storms roll in and the rain begins to fall, I pause and listen, reminded of the field and the spirits that dance within its bounds. The fear never entirely leaves, but it has transformed, evolving into a lingering respect for the mysteries of the land and the stories it holds. And perhaps that's what it means to live beside something ancient and unknown. To carry its secrets as your own, to cherish the lessons it's willing to teach, and to honor the unseen, even when it rises with the rain. I inherited the farm in a small, nondescript village tucked away somewhere in the countryside, a legacy left to me by an uncle I scarcely knew. It arrived in my life like the unexpected note of a distant piano in a silent house, uninvited but oddly resonant. It was said to be a sprawling expanse of fertile land and dense woods, complete with an old farmhouse and several outbuildings. Its remoteness was both a charm and a challenge, for it promised solitude, yet it demanded self-reliance. However, craving a break from the unyielding rhythms of city life, I decided to take up residence there for a while, to breathe in the quiet and perhaps bring the old farm back to life. The village, Ormsby, was quaint, with its cobbled streets and a solitary general store that doubled as a cafe. The locals were reserved but polite, their eyes filled with centuries of untold stories. The farm itself was a few miles out, reached only by a narrow, winding road flanked by dense hedgerows and the occasional patch of nettles that clung to the past like silent witnesses. When I first arrived, the farm was peaceful, bathed in the soft gold of an autumn afternoon. The farmhouse stood firm, its white paint faded, yet it exuded an inviting warmth. A windmill creaked lazily nearby, its blades turning with the gentle caress of the wind. My uncle had tended to a variety of animals, and though he was gone, remnants of his care lingered. Chickens clucked contentedly in their coop. A few sheep grazed lazily in the pastures, and a somber-looking horse watched me from its stable with an intensity that belied its calm demeanor. The first few days were absorbed by the mundane joy of settling in, exploring the corners of the farmhouse, discovering forgotten trinkets, and inhaling the aroma of aged wood and distant rain. The nights were cold but comforting, wrapped in deep silence, punctuated only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of a night breeze through the trees. But it was during one of these tranquil nights that the first disturbance occurred, like an uninvited whisper in a familiar song. I was awakened by a peculiar sound, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from outside. At first, I dismissed it as a branch against a window or a nocturnal creature stirring in the dark. Yet curiosity gnawed at me. I rose from my bed, wrapped a robe around myself, and ventured downstairs. The moon hung like a silent sentinel, casting its silvery glow over the fields and outbuildings. I opened the back door and stepped out, my breath visible in the chilly air. The tapping continued, now clearer, emanating from the direction of the chicken coop. As I approached, I noticed the chickens were not asleep as they should have been. Instead, they were lined up, seemingly pecking at the wooden walls of their enclosure in unison, as if caught in a trance. Their eyes, usually darting and alert, seemed glazed over, reflecting the moonlight in an unsettling manner. I stood there, perplexed and slightly unnerved, watching their hypnotic dance. After a few moments, the tapping ceased abruptly. The chickens returned to their usual restful state, leaving me with unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. Days passed, and though the incident haunted my thoughts, I rationalized it as a quirk of the animals, a one-time oddity. I immersed myself in farm work, tending to the animals and exploring the woods that bordered the property. Yet, a subtle shift had begun. The animals, once benign and predictable, started to behave in ways that bordered on the uncanny. The sheep, normally docile, gathered at the edge of their pasture, staring intently into the woods as if expecting something to emerge. The horse, too, became restless, its eyes following unseen specters in the distance. One afternoon, while mending a fence, I heard the distant lowing of cows. This was strange, as I owned no cows. The sound was persistent, echoing through the trees with an eerie resonance. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and trepidation, I followed the sound, venturing deeper into the woods than I had before. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled branches weaving a tapestry of shadows on the forest floor. The sound drew me to a small clearing, bathed in an odd light that seemed to shimmer just beyond the visible spectrum. There stood a cow. Not an ordinary cow, but a spectral outline, translucent and ethereal. It regarded me with eyes that seemed to hold a wisdom beyond human comprehension. For a moment we stood in mutual acknowledgement before it faded into the air, leaving behind an uncanny silence and a heart pounding in my chest. I returned to the farm, my mind racing with what I'd seen, or what I thought I had seen. The boundaries of reality seemed to warp and blur, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The animals were no longer mere livestock. They had become an enigmatic presence, their actions imbued with a disquieting intelligence. As the days turned to weeks, the atmosphere on the farm grew heavier, each moment steeped in a tension that refused to dissipate. The animals' strange behavior intensified. The chickens now gathered each night, their tapping becoming a familiar nocturne, while the sheep formed cryptic patterns in the pasture, circles and lines that hinted at some hidden geometry. I found myself drawn to the woods again, despite the unease it brought. Each venture deeper into its depths unveiled new mysteries. A circle of stones here, a whispering breeze that carried words I could almost understand. The presence of unseen eyes weighed on me, a constant reminder that I was not alone. One evening, as the horizon bled into dusk, I stood at the edge of the forest, the farm behind me cloaked in shadows. The wind had stilled, and an expectant hush settled over the land. Then, from the woods they emerged, not animals of flesh and bone, but spectral apparitions. The echoes of creatures that once roamed the fields, they moved with a grace and purpose that seemed to mock the living, their eyes aglow with an otherworldly light. The climax of this surreal symphony was a cacophony of sounds, whispers, growls, and the haunting lowing of cattle. The air shimmered with an energy that was almost palpable, a force that resonated with every fiber of my being. The animals on the farm joined in, their cries mingling with the spectral chorus, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. In that moment, I understood. The farm was not just a piece of land. It was a threshold, a bridge between worlds where the past and present coalesced in a dance of shadows and light. The animals, both real and spectral, were guardians of this liminal space, their intelligence a reflection of the mysteries they protected. As the night deepened, the apparitions began to fade, their presence dissolving like mist under the sun. The animals on the farm returned to their usual routines, their eyes once again mundane, their actions stripped of mystical intent. Yet the farm was forever changed in my eyes, as was I. The lingering fear remained, a subtle reminder of the night's revelations, lurking behind the veil of everyday life. Though the specters had retreated, their presence was etched into the land, an indelible part of its history and mine. I continued to live on the farm, tending to the animals in the land, embracing the solitude that had once seemed daunting. The village folk regarded me with a mix of curiosity and wariness, tales of my experiences weaving themselves into the fabric of local lore. In the end, the farm became a place of harmony, a sanctuary, where the boundaries between the seen and unseen danced in perpetual balance. A reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of understanding, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek them out. Mercy Farms was the kind of place that existed in the folds of time. It was out of the way, situated beyond the old limestone bridge that arched over the river like the back of a sleeping giant, casting its shadow over the water. The town itself had a quaint charm, wrapped in the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of church bells that rang every Sunday morning. Vintage gas lamps lined the streets, their glass panes misted with age, and the people were friendly, always ready with a warm smile or a gentle nod. It was a place that seemed untouched by the haste and noise of the modern world. I first heard about Mercy Farms from a colleague at the publishing house. He described it as a perfect getaway, a spot to retreat from the hectic pulse of the city and immerse oneself in the simplicity of country life. The idea appealed to me, so I booked a stay at one of the guest cottages they offered and set off with a suitcase packed with books and a mind eager for solitude. The journey there was pleasant enough, the road winding through fields painted gold by the sun, the horizon dotted with the silhouettes of trees that stood like silent sentinels. As I passed the bridge, the air seemed to change, growing heavier, as if thick with promises of peace and quiet. The guest cottage was situated on the edge of the farm, a quaint little abode with ivy creeping up its stone walls, and a view of the sprawling fields beyond. The interior was charmingly rustic, with wooden beams crossing the ceiling and a fireplace that promised warmth against the evening chill. It was everything I had imagined and more. A perfect setting to unwind and perhaps find inspiration for my next novel. The first few days were blissfully uneventful. I spent my mornings wandering the fields, letting the gentle breeze weave through my thoughts, and my afternoons nestled in an armchair with a book in hand. The people of Mercy Farms were kind, if a bit reserved, and each encounter left me with a sense of polite cordiality. It was easy to slip into the rhythm of the place as if I had walked into a well-worn story, one where the characters knew their lines by heart. It was on the fourth day that the first whisper of something amiss reached me. I had ventured into the village to replenish my supplies and was browsing through the aisles of the general store when I noticed a woman standing by the window, her expression distant. Her eyes, a curious shade of gray, seemed to be staring at something far away. I followed her gaze, but found nothing out of the ordinary. When she turned to me, her smile was quick, almost too quick, as if practiced. "You must be the writer," she said, her voice lilting in a way that made the simple statement feel significant. "That's right," I replied, offering a smile of my own. "It's a beautiful place you have here." Her expression shifted, a flicker of something, was it doubt, crossing her features before vanishing. "Yes, it is," she said, her tone oddly firm. "But be careful not to wander too far. The fields can be confusing." I chuckled, nodding as if I understood, but her words lingered with me longer than they should have. Confusing? How could a field be confusing? I thought of mentioning it to my host, a genial man named Mr. Eldridge who managed the cottages, but decided against it. Perhaps it was nothing more than a local quirk. The next day, I set out for a longer walk, curious to explore beyond the familiar paths. The sky was a canvas of soft blues and whites, the air crisp and invigorating. I followed a trail that led deeper into the farmland, the landscape stretching out with its golden waves of crops and occasional clusters of trees. It was serene, almost dreamlike. Lost in thought, I nearly missed the figure standing among the rows of corn. A man, his back turned to me, seemingly absorbed in his task. I called out a greeting, but he didn't respond. Odd, but not entirely out of place. I continued on, the incident slipping into the background of my mind. It was only when I tried to retrace my steps back to the cottage that I realized something was wrong. The path, which had seemed so straightforward, now twisted in unfamiliar ways. Landmarks I thought I had noted, the lone pine tree, the old stone well, were nowhere to be seen. An unsettling sensation crept over me, a whisper of unease that grew louder with every step I took. Hours passed, or so it seemed, and my confidence waned. I began to feel the weight of isolation pressing down, the vastness of the fields turning into a labyrinth. My heart drummed a steady beat of anxiety against my ribs, and the sky above began to lose its color, the blue bleeding into shades of gray. I finally stumbled upon a path that led me back to the village, my relief palpable. But something had changed. The streets were empty, the windows of the houses darkened, as if the village had held its breath in my absence. I reached the cottage, my sanctuary, and locked the door behind me, the familiar creak of the wood offering a semblance of comfort. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay in bed, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house, the whisper of wind against the window. My mind churned with fragmented thoughts, the strange occurrences knitting themselves into a pattern I couldn't quite decipher. The following day brought rain, a steady drizzle that painted the landscape in shades of gray. I decided to stay indoors, preferring the company of my books to the unsettling strangeness outside. As I sat by the window, watching the droplets race each other down the glass, I noticed something peculiar, a figure of a person standing at the edge of the field, just beyond the reach of the farm's boundary. Immobile, like a scarecrow left to guard the crops. I strained my eyes, but the rain blurred the details, turning the figure into a shadowy outline. Days passed with an uneasy tension settling in my bones. The villagers seemed unchanged, their smiles and greetings consistent, yet there was an unspoken undercurrent, a heaviness in the air that clung to me. I began to feel watched, a sensation I couldn't shake off, as if the walls themselves held secrets they dared not whisper. One evening, driven by restless curiosity, I decided to confront the mystery of the fields. I set out under the cloak of dusk, the sky bruised with the colors of nightfall. My steps were cautious, the path ahead obscured by the encroaching darkness. The fields lay silent, the wind still, as if the world held its breath. As I walked, I felt a pull, an invisible thread leading me deeper into the heart of the farmland. The whisper of the cornstalks became a chorus, voices overlapping, rising and falling in a rhythm that matched my pulse. I felt as if I were on the edge of uncovering something vital, something that lay hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy. And then I saw it, a clearing surrounded by the towering corn, its center marked by a solitary tree. Its branches reached skyward, bare and twisted, a stark contrast against the otherwise uniform landscape. Beneath it stood a figure, cloaked in shadow, the outline familiar yet wrong in the dim light. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the vastness. The figure turned, and what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. It was the man from the field, yet his face, it was like looking into a mirror distorted by ripples, features shifting subtly, blurring and reforming. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice carrying a strange echo. "This place, it's not what it seems." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice thin against the growing wind. He stepped closer, the movement fluid and unsettling. "Mercy Farms is a place forgotten by time, where the past lingers like a ghost. We are all trapped here, caught in a loop that repeats. A story without an end." I shook my head, disbelief warring with the cold certainty in his eyes. "There has to be a way out," I insisted, desperation edging my words. "There might be," he said, his gaze slipping past me to the horizon. "But it requires sacrifice, a letting go." I turned, following his gaze, seeing nothing but the endless fields and the faint glow of the village beyond. When I looked back, he was gone, leaving only the rustle of the corn as testament to his presence. I returned to the cottage, my thoughts tangled with questions and fear. The village was unchanged. the people moving through their routines with practiced ease, yet I saw them differently now, shadows of their true selves. I felt the weight of the place pressing down, the knowledge that I was caught in its web, unable to escape. Days blurred together, each one a repetition of the last, and I found myself succumbing to the rhythm of the farm, my will eroding like sand beneath the tide. The villagers, too, seemed caught in their roles, their eyes flickering with a strange awareness when they thought no one was looking. I contemplated leaving, but the thought of the roads twisting into infinity, of wandering forever in the maze of fields, kept me rooted. Mercy Farms had ensnared me, its grip tightening with each passing day. On what felt like the 100th day, I ventured into the village once more, hoping for answers. The woman from the store was there, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of understanding. "How do I leave?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. She hesitated, her gaze shifting to the window, the fields beyond. "You must find the heart of the farm," she said, her voice a whisper. "And there, you must give up what holds you here." Her words haunted me as I returned to the cottage, the weight of them settling like a stone in my chest. I realized then that the farm was not a place but a state of being, a mirror held up to the soul. To leave, I had to confront whatever it was I clung to, whatever kept me tethered to this timeless place. It was on the final night that I found myself drawn once more to the clearing, the wind a gentle lament that guided me. The tree stood as before, its branches outstretched, the figure absent, but the presence unmistakably there. I stood beneath the tree, eyes closed, and let the memories wash over me. The choices unmade, the paths not taken, the regrets that whispered in the silence of night. I felt the weight of them lift, dissipating like mist in the morning sun. In that moment, I understood what needed to be done. I let go, a deliberate release of the past that bound me. The fields sighed around me, a soft murmur of approval, and I felt the world shift, the spell of Mercy Farms breaking. As dawn broke, I found myself walking towards the village, the path clear and unwavering. The people moved with purpose, their eyes meeting mine with smiles that held genuine warmth. I knew then that the farm was a place meant not for entrapment, but for revelation. A crucible for the soul. I left Mercy Farms behind, the bridge arching over the river marking my passage back into the world. But even now, I carry its lessons with me, the memory of that timeless place, a reminder of the power of letting go, of finding truth amidst the whispers of the past. Nestled in the rolling green hills of South Serbia, the village of Gornje Bojanja was a serene tableau of timeless beauty. The village lay quietly under the watchful gaze of the surrounding hills, their verdant slopes a stark contrast to the dusty roads and stone cottages that defined the landscape. Life here moved at a rhythm dictated by the seasons, with the villagers rising and resting with the sun, their days filled with the honest labor of tending to fields and livestock. The air was crisp and carried with it the scent of pine and wildflowers, a soothing balm for the soul. I arrived in Gornje Bojanja seeking solace from the relentless pace of city life. A writer by profession, I had grown weary of the urban cacophony and the ceaseless demands of modern existence. The village promised a quiet retreat, a place where I could lose myself in thought and perhaps rediscover my creative muse. The locals were warm and welcoming, their faces weathered by the sun and etched with the kind of wisdom that comes only from a life lived in harmony with nature. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I decided to take a walk through the hills. The villagers warned me about venturing out late, speaking in hushed tones of the spirits that roamed the land after dark. I dismissed their tales as mere superstition, remnants of a bygone era when the unknown was explained away with stories of ghosts and demons. I had always considered myself a rational man, grounded in the tangible world and unafraid of shadows and specters. As I meandered along the path that wound its way up the hills, a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, whispering secrets in a language I could not understand. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the landscape, and the stars twinkled like distant lanterns guiding my way. There was a tranquility to the night, a sacred stillness that seemed to envelop the world in a warm embrace. It was then that I first noticed something amiss. A peculiar chill in the air. A sudden drop in temperature that raised goosebumps on my skin. The forest, which moments before had been alive with the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl, fell eerily silent. An unsettling quietness that pressed in on me from all sides, as if the very earth had paused its breath, waiting. I shook off the unease and continued on my way, convincing myself that it was merely the cool night air playing tricks on my mind. But as I ventured deeper into the hills, the sense of foreboding grew stronger, a palpable presence that seemed to watch my every step. Shadows stretched and twisted in the moonlight, taking on shapes that defied logic and reason. And I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone or something following in my footsteps. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible murmur carried by the wind, chorus of whispers that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath my feet, voices overlapping in a symphony of sorrow and longing. They called to me in a language older than time, their words heavy with emotion, though their meaning was lost to me. Fear clutched at my heart, yet an inexplicable curiosity drove me onward, deeper into the hills, where the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The path, once clear and well-trodden, began to fade, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The path, once clear and well-trodden, began to fade, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. I stumbled over roots and stones, the terrain becoming increasingly treacherous, as if the land itself were conspiring to keep me away from whatever truth lay hidden in its depths. It was in a small clearing that I finally came face to face with the source of the whispers. A solitary oak tree stood at its center, ancient and gnarled, its branches twisted into grotesque forms. Beneath its boughs lay a circle of stones, arranged with a precision that suggested ritual significance. As I approached, the air grew thick with a sense of reverence, and I felt compelled to kneel before the tree, as if paying homage to a forgotten deity. The whispers crescendoed, their voices now a clamorous tide that threatened to overwhelm my senses. My mind reeled with images, scenes from a past I could not have known but felt in the very marrow of my bones. I saw a village not unlike Gornja Bojanja, burning under a blood-red sky, its inhabitants fleeing in terror from an unseen fort. I saw mothers clutching their children, men brandishing pitchforks and torches, their faces masks of fear and determination. And then I saw them, the spirits, wreathed in shadow, their forms flickered like the dying embers of a fire caught between this world and the next. Their eyes were hollows of despair, yet within them burned a fierce, unyielding flame. They reached out to me, their hands like tendrils of mist, beseeching, pleading, for release from their eternal torment. I awoke to the first light of dawn, lying at the base of the oak tree. The whispers now a distant echo in the recesses of my mind. My heart pounded in my chest, and my body ached with a weariness that went beyond the physical. I stumbled back to the village, the morning air heavy with a scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. The villagers greeted me with knowing looks, their eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and understanding. They spoke little of what had transpired, as if discussing the spirits would somehow give them more power. But their silence spoke volumes, and I understood then that the land was indeed cursed, its history stained with the blood of those who had once called it home. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn back to the hills, compelled to return to the clearing and the ancient oak. Each visit was accompanied by the same sense of dread and anticipation, the whispers growing louder, more coherent, as if the spirits were slowly unraveling their tragic tale. I learned of a great betrayal, of a pact made and broken, and the terrible price that had been exacted. The villagers, once welcoming and warm, now regarded me with suspicion and fear. They whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances in my direction, as if I had become a part of the very legend that haunted their lives. I could feel the weight of their unease, a palpable tension that hung over the village like a storm cloud ready to burst. As the days turned to weeks, the line between reality and the supernatural began to blur. I found myself waking in the middle of the night, the whispers echoing in my ears, their pleas growing more desperate, more insistent. My dreams were haunted by visions of the past, of the village in flames and the spirits trapped in their endless cycle of suffering. The climax came on a night when the moon was obscured by thick clouds, and the wind howled through the village like a banshee's wail. I was drawn to the hills once more, my feet moving of their own accord. Driven by a force I could neither understand nor resist. As I reached the clearing, the whispers erupted into a cacophony, a maelstrom of voices that clawed at my mind, demanding to be heard. I stood before the oak tree, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The spirits appeared before me, their forms more distinct than ever, their eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. They reached out, and this time I understood their plea. They sought liberation, a release from the curse that bound them to this place, and it was my presence, my understanding, that could finally set them free. With a deep breath, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be enveloped by the whispers, to become one with the memories of the past. I felt the pain and anguish of the spirits, their hope and despair, and a profound sense of peace washed over me as I offered them the absolution they so desperately sought. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty and the air was still once more. The spirits were gone, their whispers silenced, leaving behind an eerie calm that settled over the land. I returned to the village, my heart lighter, though the weight of what had transpired would forever linger in my soul. The villagers greeted me with a quiet respect, their fear replaced by a cautious hope that perhaps the curse had finally been lifted. Yet I could feel the shadows that still lurked at the edges of the village, remnants of a darkness that could never truly be banished. I left Gonjabojana soon after, the tranquility I had once sought now a distant memory, replaced by the knowledge of the spirits and their tragic fate. As I returned to the city and the chaos of modern life, I carried with me the story of the hills, a reminder of the unseen forces that shape our world and the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. And though I no longer heard the whispers, their presence lingered in my thoughts, a constant reminder of the fragile nature of reality and the mysteries that lie just beyond the reach of human understanding. The spirits of the hills may have found peace, but their tale, woven into the very fabric of the land, would endure. A chilling testament to the power of memory and the indelible mark of history. It was a late autumn day, and the orange and yellow leaves drifted lazily from the trees, each one spinning slowly through the crisp air before settling gently on the ground. The village of Eldridge lay nestled between thick forests and rolling hills, a quaint and quiet place where time seemed to trickle by rather than flow. The centerpiece of the village, the old sawmill, stood silent at the far edge, abandoned for decades, but still casting a long shadow over the community. It was a place of whispered stories and half-remembered tales, the kind passed down from generation to generation, often told by the hearth in hushed tones. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the cobbled streets, I found myself inexplicably drawn to the sawmill. It was an unremarkable urge at first, a simple curiosity perhaps, or a desire to witness the fading glory of a bygone era. I had moved to Eldridge only recently, seeking solace from the frantic pace of city life, and the sawmill seemed to be the heart of whatever history this place possessed. Approaching the sawmill, I noticed its windows, or rather the remnants where windows once were, gaping like blind eyes. The wooden structure, though weathered and wrapped in vines, maintained a certain dignity, a steadfastness against the encroaching elements. I pushed open the creaky door, its hinges protesting with a groan, and stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, and there was a stillness that seemed to swallow every sound. It was then, amidst the silence, that I saw them, the carvings. They were etched into the wooden beams, crude and uneven, as if done in haste or desperation. At first, I thought them to be the idle work of village children, or perhaps the remnants of some forgotten crafts, but as I ran my fingers over the grooves, a chill crept up my spine. They weren't just random marks, they were words, names, dates. My pulse quickened, and I felt an inexplicable sense of intrusion, as if I were trespassing upon something sacred. I left the sawmill with the sun setting behind the hills, casting the village in deep shadows. That night I dreamed of the names, and of voices, faint, indistinct whispers that I could not quite understand. The disturbances began subtly at first. A misplaced book, a flickering light, the sensation of being watched. I attributed it to the newness of my surroundings, the unfamiliar creaks and groans of an old house settling into my consciousness. Yet, as the days wore on, the unease grew, weaving itself into the fabric of my everyday life. Curiosity soon turned to compulsion. I revisited the sawmill, driven by an urge I could neither name nor tame. The words on the beams had multiplied, though I could not remember if they had been so numerous before. They seemed to speak to me, to call out beyond the boundary of the living to something other. One rainy afternoon, as the patter of droplets played a somber melody on the roof, I ran my fingers over the names again. This time, I noticed something different. A new name, freshly carved, standing out stark against the weathered wood. It was my own. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, a heavy weight settling in my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. My mind raced, searching for explanations, for logical conclusions. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, or a figment of my imagination, yet the deeper instinct, the one that nestled in the pit of my stomach, told me otherwise. I was connected to this place in ways I could not comprehend, bound by fate or folly to the silent voices that hovered at the edge of perception. The presence of the sawmill began to bleed into my daily life. The feeling of being watched, no longer left when I returned home. Shadows that shouldn't be lingered in the corners of my rooms. And the whispers, always at the edge of hearing, grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of things lost, of promises unkept, of lives cut short. And with their growing crescendo, I felt an undeniable pull towards the sawmill, as if it were a lodestone and I the hapless iron. The climax came suddenly, a crescendo of understanding and fear mingling as one. It was another quiet night, the air heavy with an impending storm. I was drawn once more to the sawmill, the compulsion now a physical tug at my very being. The path was shrouded in mist, and the village seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Inside, the air was thick with a palpable energy, an unseen force that hummed through the wooden beams and floorboards. The carvings seemed to pulse with life, the words rearranging themselves before my eyes. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my chest, as the whispers reached a cacophony, then fell silent. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt a presence beside me, a shift in the air, an ethereal form that defied my sight, yet filled my senses. It spoke not in words, but in thoughts and impressions, a lament of lives unfulfilled, of a legacy tainted by tragedy. It sought connection, closure, a voice to the voiceless. In that moment of clarity, I understood that the sawmill was a beacon, a gathering place for spirits unmoored by time. Their messages, carved into the wood, were a testament, a plea, an acknowledgement of existence, and my presence there was both catalyst and conduit, called forth to bear witness, to remember. As dawn's light filtered through the skeletal trees, the presence faded, leaving me with a profound sense of peace and purpose. The whispers receded, replaced by a quietude that settled deep within my soul. I left the sawmill that morning not as a visitor, but as a keeper of its secrets. The village resumed its tranquil rhythm, and the sawmill, once looming and foreboding, became a monument of remembrance rather than dread. Yet the experience lingered, a reminder etched into the fabric of my life. I knew that the sawmill would always hold a part of me, just as I held a part of it, a connection forged across the divide of life and death. Even now, as I walk the familiar paths of Eldredge, the sawmill silhouette standing tall against the horizon, I feel its presence, a subtle whisper of the past, a gentle reminder of the stories that remain untold. And with each visit, I find the names have changed once more, ever shifting, their messages eternally carved into the wood, waiting for the next soul to listen.